Hello everyone, it's Silver. This is SOULVARS. So this is kind of like a JRPG mixed with some deck builder elements as well, but do note this is not a roguelite deck builder. It's not one of those. In fact, it doesn't involve cards at all. But instead is a more like traditional JRPG structure, but using deck building mechanics, basically is what I mean. And the way it works is you'll have a city to traverse around, and you can go to various different areas in this city, and each area will have a whole bunch of screens that make up the whole area itself, and then it will also have several different exits that will lead you to new parts of the city and unlock more places for you to go. There are lots of different places to choose from, and you'll eventually find that you've got quite a few different missions to juggle at a time, so you can go to a lot of places in different orders. This is not like a super linear JRPG, but is instead about giving you this city to sort of go nuts in, and oftentimes you're given several different objectives at once, and you can choose to tackle them in whatever order you choose, and even do some side stuff along the way. Now, this is an entirely combat-focused game. There is some dialogue, and there are some scenes and some story and some lore bits and all that stuff, but it's all relatively minor, and the dialogue is pretty straightforward. So it's not about like having a bunch of dialogue options or dialogue trees or anything like that. It's just a simple story being told to you, and most of what you do is combat. And luckily, the combat is very good in this game, so it actually works out pretty well. It is sort of based entirely around exploring these large areas screen by screen, getting various resources and pieces of equipment and making yourself stronger, and facing off against these horrible creatures in combat. And the combat is, of course, where the deck building elements come in. So the way that it works is every character is equipped with this thing, and this thing has these things called soul bits in it, and soul bits are basically like cards, effectively. They are your attacks and your buffs and debuffs and all the actions that a character can take. And these soul bits that a character has access to is based entirely around their equipment. So your main weapon will give you a selection of soul bits as well as stats. You have a sub-weapon that doesn't give you any stats, but it still gives you all the soul bits. And then you have some other slots like armor and accessories that can give you bits, and the character themselves often has some that are specific to them based on the passive skills that they have obtained through getting stronger. And every turn in battle, you'll have a sort of deck of 5 bits at the bottom of the screen. And everyone will start with 1 AP, and you can use any number of bits in your hand that you want for as many AP as you have. None of them cost more than 1, basically is what I'm saying. So if you have 2 AP, then you can use 2 bits. So then you select all the possible bits for your characters to use one after another, and then once you've chosen them all, they'll all act, and the enemies will act, and that will be 1 turn, and then it'll go back to your characters, and your hand will sort of refresh. The way it works is your hand is always sort of ticking to the left, basically, and new abilities are coming in from the right. So your whole deck of abilities, based on the equipment that you have and everything, they are all sort of coming in from the right side of the screen, and as you use them, they'll just keep filling in more until eventually you run out. And the interesting thing about running out, by the way, in a lot of deck builders, usually once you run out of things completely, you reshuffle your discard pile back into your draw pile and you start over. But in this game, you actually have to pay health to do that. Once you run out of new bits to draw, you gain the ability to, at any time, spend 25% of your current HP in order to start over, to redraw from the beginning and shuffle everything back again. So that's an interesting idea because, usually it doesn't cost you anything to do so unless you want to do it early in some games, but in this game you can only do it by sacrificing some health. And it is current health, not maximum health, by the way, so it can't kill you. It can reduce you to 1 HP, but it can't actually kill you. And you got to be careful about doing this because, of course, that's, 25% is not a small amount of health to lose in one burst. So you do have to be cautious about when you use this. Sometimes it might be best to just skip a character's turn entirely if you feel that you can win the battle with what the other characters have in order to just keep them from sacrificing a bunch of health. And that's because every new battle restarts from the beginning of their decks again, so everything gets shuffled back again at the beginning of every battle. So if you're able to end a battle without shuffling anyone's and not having to worry about that health loss, then you're good to go. But of course, in the more difficult and longer battles, you may have to shuffle a couple of times in order to actually keep everyone going. And it's an interesting bit of tactics to have to worry about when to spend the health and when to hold back and stuff like that. And to help with this, you do have a sort of full party heal ability on the right stick. You can switch this ability out for several other things, but they all heal in some way. Many of them do other stuff too, but they all at least heal some. So you do have this full party heal available, and it simply charges up by doing damage and taking damage, so it will charge up multiple times in longer battles and allow you to help keep yourselves alive. You also have a lot of different consumables that you can use in battle, and these can range from just your normal healing items to curative stuff, as well as some cores. Cores actually cause special bits to appear in a character's hand the next time it refreshes. So these give you basically extra attacks that you normally don't have. Usually they're quite powerful things as well that are unique to certain enemies, so they're almost like a form of blue magic, basically. But in terms of the consumables, this is where the game does another kind of interesting thing. You can only use a certain number of them per battle, per character. So every character has an item stat, and this determines how many items they can use in a battle. And this does not refresh until the battle is over. So if you're in like a really hard boss battle and you've had to heal multiple times, then you could easily run out of the ability to actually heal. You might still have a bunch of healing items left, but you won't be able to use any of them because your characters will run out of item uses. This is another interesting bit of tactical depth, I think, because it makes you have to think pretty heavily about when you use items. Since it's not just about being limited to how many you have in your pocket, it's also limited to how many times you can reach into that pocket per battle. And for a lot of characters, it's about 2 times. So you can't do it that often. You can't like spam healing items in this game. Although you do get the ability to expand that number in various ways. There are certain pieces of equipment and accessories and other things that will give you more item uses. So if you want to focus one of your characters on having less armor but more item uses and make them kind of like a support, you can do that. There are all kinds of different weapons that you can find and equip. You'll get a lot of these just from exploring around the place, although there are also shops where you can buy some. You'll get various different currencies, well, 2 different currencies from killing enemies. One of them is a sort of gold-like currency that you spend most of the time, and then there are these crystals that I'll talk about in a second. So in between battle areas, you can go back to the city map menu and choose one of the safe areas where there will be some shops where you can spend this gold currency on various new pieces of gear if you want to, and some other stuff as well, because there are also mods. A lot of gear has these blue mod slots in the upper right corner of the equipment screen, and you can choose to modify that gear with as many mods as it has slots for. So you can put all sorts of different things in these slots, from your basic stuff like increasing attack or defense stats to more advanced stuff like increasing your damage capability with certain elements. And there are some mods that actually add new bits to that item. So you might have something like, say, a fire bit mod where you can modify your jacket with this and it will add a fire cast spell to that jacket, so anyone that's equipped with that jacket can cast a fireball spell. Now, as you battle, you will be able to get more AP than the initial one that you get every turn, because of course you really need more than that in order to make the most of the battle system, and there are lots of different ways to get more AP per turn. Attacking enemies' weaknesses, healing, buffing your party members, dodging attacks, all sorts of different things can give you more AP, and you can have up to 5 totals stored each turn. And this is important because the most powerful attacks in the game are arts, and arts are combinations of at least 2 bits used together, some of them 3 or 4 bits used together. And when you do this, it forms a unique attack with its own animations that is a lot stronger than the individual parts that went into it. So 2 basic sword slash bits may combine into cross slash, which is a 2-hit attack that's much more powerful than those 2 sword slashes would individually be normally. Or maybe a stat buff plus the fire spell will instead create something called prominence, which is like a huge personal stat buff that like drastically increases your attack and psi, which is like magic attack, and also increases your firepower, like your literal firepower, the power of the fire element. And this means that if you use like fiery attacks after buffing yourself with prominence, they are drastically more powerful than they were before. So these aren't only attacks, they can also be buffs and stuff too. And these can be really, really strong, and you definitely want to learn as many of them as you can, and you will often find these consumable items that will teach new arts to whatever character you use them on, but you want to use them on characters that make sense, right? Like, if you have, say, the Volt Wave art, which is like an AoE lightning damage spell, and it takes a lightning and a fire bit, I think, combined together, and that will make it. And of course, you wouldn't want to give that to someone that, say, doesn't have any lightning bits in their repertoire, so they couldn't use it anyway, so you wouldn't want to waste it on them. But if maybe you equip them with something that gives them some lightning temporarily at least, then they could use it. And it's all about building your party to use these arts as most effective as they can. You know, some of them get really specific, like you need a fire, a kick, and 2 dagger bits or something like that. So that means that you really need to put them on specific characters that can most take advantage of the combinations that they require. But you are heavily rewarded for building your party this way because all the arts are super good. So not only do they have really cool animations, but they are the way that you're going to be defeating the harder enemies. You're basically not going to be able to defeat the bosses and things unless you're fully taking advantage of the weakness in the art systems. So it's a key part of the deck building elements that the game uses in order to build decks of bits for each character that not only are good for them, but also combine into very useful arts that they can all cast. Now, the character's piece of equipment that they're using that gives them the soul bit power, these can be changed out just like any other piece of equipment, so the sort of source of their soul bits. And these have a sort of percentage-based synchronicity rating, and it goes up every time you complete a battle, and of course harder enemies will give you more percentage. And every certain number of percentage thresholds that they reach, this item unlocks more pieces of itself, so it'll get stronger, and whatever stats it gives the character will increase in magnitude. And also you'll be able to spend these crystals I mentioned that you get from killing enemies on getting more passive benefits. So maybe at 20% it gives the ability to add 20 HP to that character, and you can spend some crystals to get that. Or maybe at 25% it unlocks a new art for them to use based on the other things that it's given them so far, like fire and sword abilities, so it gives them like a sword fire art, and you can purchase that. So you want to use these crystals pretty often to keep your characters extra strong. This is one of the main ways you're going to improve their capabilities, because these pieces of equipment are going to get stronger, but they're going to need you to spend this crystal currency on them to get those thresholds of extra power and extra abilities for them to use and stuff. And also worth mentioning, by the way, all of the crystal purchased passive skills that you get from this, they're permanent to that character. So if you unequip that item and equip a different one, you keep all of the passive things that you bought from the previous one. So you're encouraged to swap them around and try to synchronize with new ones in order to get a repertoire of more and more powerful stuff. Every character also has some skills they can use in battle separate from the bits. These are often things like making the next draw a guaranteed elemental magic attack, or changing one of the bits on the board to something else, like say maybe you change one of the wind elemental bits to a healing one or something. Basically, a lot of these are based around manipulating the deck, right? They're making you draw specific things or changing what you've drawn into something else or something like that. They do cost SP though, and characters don't have very much SP to start with, so you can't spam these abilities, but they do tend to be quite powerful. However, another one that every character has is a bit of a risk-reward mechanic that I find kind of interesting. It's sort of like a limit break kind of idea. Basically, everyone has this transformation that they can do, but they can only use it at critically low health. So once their health is in the red, if they want to, they can choose to use this and transform into a sort of beast. And this will drastically buff their stats and make them a lot more powerful, and also give them access to a special soul bit that is like a limit break attack. However, using this attack will untransform them, although the transformation does fully heal them when it goes off. So this is a super powerful state that everyone can enter into, but you have to be at critical health to do it. So you've got to kind of manage the risk-reward of that. Like, do you think someone can survive long enough to stay at critical health in order for their turn to come up and for them to transform? Or should you just heal everyone now and avoid that for the moment? You know, it's another little element of tactical choice, and the overall power of these forms does help to make it more worthwhile. You know, it is something to genuinely consider. It is actually worth letting someone get to critical health in order to transform because of how good they are. This is also linked into the burst system. This is sort of like a stagger mechanic, so you'll notice that a lot of the bits have these arrows in the upper left corner of their symbol. And some of them don't, those just do normal damage, but there are some with these white arrows. They do very low damage, but they build a lot of burst. And then there are red arrows that are the opposite. They do a lot of damage, but build almost no burst at all. And then there are some blue ones that like debuff enemy stats and things like that. When an enemy reaches 100% burst, it builds up every time you attack them no matter what, but it's those burst attacks that do the best job. And when it completely fills up, they lose their turn and they take drastically increased damage for a little while. So for like 2 turns, basically, they will take significantly increased damage, and they'll of course lose that action that they were going to perform previously. So what you want to do, of course, is use burst attacks to build up burst as fast as you can, and then save your more powerful power attacks and the big limit break stuff and all that for when the burst is actually active to do the most damage possible. And once you master the sort of flow of combat to building burst and then paying that off with huge arts and power attacks and all that stuff, you'll notice that the overall pace of the game's combat is very fast. As far as like turn-based JRPG combat goes, this is some of the faster that I've seen, and a lot of that is because you're supposed to be, you know, using these known quantities of the decks that you've built each character to have in order to produce the right burst attacks and then produce the right arts and all that stuff. You're sort of optimizing your turns to be speedy and effective. Everything is based around time, by the way. Every screen that you go through advances 1 minute, and also battles advance time. And once you are on the main map screen in between areas, you can choose to rest to recover everyone's HP and SP, but that increases time as well. And this is relevant because there are certain things have time limits, and there are also certain side quests and other bits of stuff that you can do that have to be done at a specific time. Like, you know, you have to go to this area specifically at midnight in order to face a certain boss and things like that. So you do have to manage your time as well. I think overall SOULVARS is a pretty cool JRPG. I think it's doing things a lot differently, and I like seeing deck building elements in games that aren't roguelites. You know, I enjoy those games as well, but I like seeing those elements enter their way into other genres too, and I like seeing it in a more traditional, like, retro-flavored JRPG package. I think they meld together really well and create some really fun combat. And if you're into JRPGs, or if you're into like very combat-focused RPGs or deck builders, then I think this is definitely a safe pickup because it's quite good at it, and it also doesn't cost very much to begin with, which is helpful. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for SOULVARS, so you can go and check it out on your own time. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.